And so our title today is Breaking Out of the Fetters. What indeed is there in the world that does not conceal you? Yet nothing exists that can conceal you from your devotees. And this speaks instantly to the paradox of our existence and our dependence on our senses. Because the mere existence of our perceptual capacity is an expression of our limitation. You know, seeing is limiting. To see is to be limited because everything, and it's very interesting to me that of late there are theoretical developments in physics, and particularly the end of physics that pays attention to cognition, perception, measurement. But it's interesting that now theoretical work is coming to the forefront, which suggests that matter itself emerges out of consciousness. That matter is dependent on consciousness. And of course, to me, this makes perfect sense, but to you, it may not yet make perfect sense. But in this statement, what Utpaladeva is suggesting is that matter is dependent on consciousness, and the emergence of matter out of consciousness distracts us from its underlying reality, which is never separate. It's, which is in fact the total unity of everything, the underlying reality of matter. So we see a thing and we engage the thing, we engage our senses and engage the thing when the thing is, in fact, nothing other than the background from which it has appeared and into which it will subside, just as we will, just as all of our perceptions and our cognition and our very existence, we emerge as expressions of these fundamental activities of cognition, perception. We dissolve into that fundamental reality, and so for those of us who are engaged in the process of devotion and paying attention to the activity of awareness that is our fundamental ground, what we see is consciousness itself. And for that reason, nothing that exists can conceal the object of our devotion from us, because we are itself that devotion, attained by so many disciples and with so many attributes. You appear at all times to the devotees in your true form, O Lord. Of course, however Shiva appears, however anything appears, is in fact the true form of Shiva. Everything that appears is the true form of Shiva, never separate from consciousness, and also the process of emerging, appearing, cognizing, deciding, you know, judging, opinionating, attitudinalizing. All of these processes are nothing but the form of Shiva. Making, misunderstanding, reacting, emoting, you know, ego clinging. All of these appearances are the very form of Shiva and can never be separated. There is only one. And yet, for those of us who long for an end to the yellow jacket's nest of mental activity that is constantly, generating fear and anxiety and suffering, constantly, manifesting as a mass of stinging insects, useless, stupid waste of time. For those of us who long for some end to that and some peace and the capacity to appreciate the experience of devotion, our attention, we are driven to see beyond all of this mass of ridiculousness to its source. And even though all the mass of ridiculousness can never be separate from the oneness that is, and that mass of ridiculousness is, and all of its nuance is in fact the true form of the Lord. We get to the next line, which goes, triumphant, they laugh. That is, the devotees of the Lord, triumphant, they laugh. Vanquished, they laugh even more. Those few select who are made completely insane. It's not what it says in the poem. I've exaggerated it slightly. Those select few who are maddened with the immortal wine of your devotion. That calls to mind for me the Chud text, which is the bellow laugh of the Dakini, which simply, suggests the same reality, which is, this whole extraordinary display, is a cosmic joke which is not to be taken seriously ever. It's, and what is seriousness, what is serious in any of this insane experience is simply, the demonstration of dynamism and diversity which is present in this astonishing simplicity. Let me, and each of us, delight in the sweet, sublime bliss of your devotion, leaving behind not only base powers, but liberation itself. You get that? And it's leave behind liberation itself, because liberation is a mental construct which has nothing to do with anything once you have experienced, you know, the nectar of devotion. The nectar of devotion and liberation are one and the same, you know, an experience that completely releases us from any entanglement whatsoever in our individuality or in the individuality of anything. You know, it is the nectar of devotion, which is the transcendence of duality and the immersion in the experience of pure beauty. And so, again, and this has happened for us a number of times in the text, our author is saying that, you know, within the tantric tradition, there are two goals. And one is siddhi, and the other is mukti. Siddhi is power, and mukti is liberation. And the two things are considered to be, you know, sort of part and parcel of the same thing. You have to have power in order to be liberated. You have to have power because that power gives you some confidence in yourself. It reaffirms and empowers you. And at the same time, it lifts you out of your insecurities and your anxieties to be able to rest in, you know, your own strength. And having that strength, then you can then take the next step, which is off the edge of the cliff into, you know, the disappearance of all duality. Poof. Well, that mechanism of transcendence, of the goals of the practices, you know, is the experience of true devotion and the joy, you know, which that experience is full of. And then the notion of siddhi, or power, and liberation are nothing. It is devotion which is everything. It is the contact, alignment, and flow, the total union with the ultimate reality, you know, attained, experienced based on our devotion, that frees us from, you know, the relentless stupidity of, you know, this worldly experience, and transforms even worldly experience itself into, you know, an unfoldment of wonder. You know, I don't want to leave you with the residue of some sort of negative sense of the world, because that's not what Utpaladeva is pointing out to us at all. See, full of the nectar of devotion, we have achieved a state of madness in which we no longer see the insanity of the world as anything separate from our own madness. And it's wonderful. In the same way that it arose in me, allow this love of devotion, previously unknown to me, to grow greater still, O Lord. What a simple turning of our awareness that facilitates an earth-shattering transformation. Right? I mean, it's so simple. The love of devotion. Step into that, and all of the complexity of of the world and making our way, all of the complexity of turning from the world into spirituality, and the complexity of the practices, in our diets and in our movement, and in our understanding of all the in our research into all of the physiological mechanisms and biochemical circumstances and ancestral traumas and all of their concomitant pathologies, all of that is completely and simply cut through with devotion. We are established, we cut straight to the chase. We are established in a simple perspective that brings about the emergence of beauty within ourselves. Our minds are dissolved, our hearts are opened, our fears melt, and we reside in whatever simplicity we are, or whatever complexity, in a simple state in which we see devotion every place. All of our cognitive processes, all of our mental, churnings, dissolve. Truly, I have no other entreaty but this. Let me for all time, O Lord, be consumed by unending devotion. Remember that Nityananda, my guru's guru, Nityananda said in the hour of his departure from this world, his devotees were, and there weren't many people there were a few. And these were people who were householders, and they were simple people who were of low caste who he allowed to come close to him. They were with him. They had benefited, these are people who'd been with them most of their lives and who had benefited from their contact with him materially as well as every other way. And he's there and he says to them, I am going to die within the hour. And they start crying, say, oh, please don't go. And he says to them, is your devotion pure? And they go, no, Baba, my devotion isn't pure. I still want worldly things. And then another one, he says, is your devotion pure? No, Baba. Nityananda says, if you bring in front of me one person with pure devotion, I can't go. One person with pure devotion. Because in front of pure devotion, even God cannot depart without permission. And, right at the end of his life, of course, an hour later, he died. Because there was no one. But Utpaladeva is saying here, again and again, let our prayer for ourself be to be consumed by unending devotion. And that is to be consumed by an unending appreciation for the panorama of experiential display that unfolds in front of us, and let us live in wonder of it all, not in fear. I would say, personally, I would say that the major reason, in my opinion, the major reason that I have been in my life almost always controversial is because I have refused to live in fear. Let me be enraged by and yet compassionate toward the world. We've all got that down pretty well, don't we? The enraged part. The compassion part, we might need some work on. Let me be enraged by and yet compassionate toward the world, and thus in the madness of devotion may I laugh and weep and chant Shiva thunderously. With femur bone trumpet and drum and bell and whatever other accoutrements we might care to thunder. Would you hand me my femur bone trumpet? It's next to the Padamba Sanjay statue. An accoutrement of crazy wisdom practice. It's a bone from a human leg. With this femur bone trumpet, a crazy yogi blasts out their devotion in the cemetery or in the mountain crag or in a crossroad. Blasts out their devotion, announces that devotion, and commits themselves to spreading their body across the planet for the sake of devotion, transcending all ego clinging. Not living in fear, not living in regret, not living in any kind of anything other than the supreme appreciation of the extraordinary beauty that resides in our core, that is activated and sustained by devotion. May I laugh and weep and chant and Shiva thunderously. Let even the femur bone trumpet blast out Shiva triumphantly, thunderously. Under the spell of devotion, O Lord, let me be inconstant and yet at peace, mournful and yet laughing, distracted yet aware. This is, fascinating, because each of us struggle with ourselves. Not anybody here in this room, but I'm talking about in the larger, worldly context. We, of course, we have different circumstance, but most people struggle with themselves. And here Utpaladeva is saying, he's invoking all the reasons why we struggle with ourselves. We are inconstant in our practice. We're disturbed and yet peaceful, mournful and yet cheerful, distracted and aware. In other words, under the spell of devotion, we transcend all of the inadequacies that each of us finds within ourselves and struggles somehow to remedy. And under the spell of devotion, each of us finds acceptance of ourself in this human condition that we are present in, and weeping for our limitations, we laugh relentlessly at our experience of the underlying unimaginable possibility which is present for each of us at every moment that breath flows through this rainbow-colored curtain of tissue that manifests as our name, whatever that name is. Whether within or without, your devotees know you as the embodiment of consciousness. The devotees of Shiva know that all experience is only the embodiment of the Lord, Him, herself, consciousness unconstrained. Though pretending to listen to the words of blasphemers with the needle-like sensation prickling the skin, enraptured still are the devotees with the drops of delicious nectar. Listening to worldly bullshit, we're still cheerful. However painful a sensation, it is transformed into the means of enjoyment for the devotees whose consciousness is suffused with the moonlight nectar. Moonlight nectar is the bliss emanating from Parashakti. However painful a sensation refers to the Krama doctrine of one taste. This Krama doctrine of one taste is also found in Dzogchen, which is, and Mahamudra. Dzogchen and Mahamudra are pretty much the same thing. Dzogchen as a teaching is probably older than Mahamudra. And Mahamudra is probably derived from the teachings of Dzogchen. But the one taste, idea, the one taste teaching, that pleasure and pain are one taste in the highest dimension of experience, is a Krama doctrine which predates them both. So, Utpaladeva here is bringing up that doctrine, that teaching of one taste. He's not really bringing it up. He is kind of referring to it, suggesting it, to orient us, those of us who are not fully established and not fully dissolved in the bliss of devotion. He is orienting us, to the Krama teachings, which are basically rooted in the experience of the respiratory process of perception. The respiratory process of perception. So just as your body is sustained, the experience of the body is sustained by the respiratory process of prana kundalini in this case, then the individuality, our individuality, which transcends the body, is sustained by the respiratory process of perception. And that respiratory process is the mind extending out to touch its objects, and then absorbing the touch of that object or the contact of that object with that object back into itself. And in its absorbing of that into itself, it is changed to extend itself again and be changed, and again and be changed, and again and to be changed in an endless process of self-renewal that is rooted in bliss and dissolves the experience of both pleasure and pain into an unbroken flow that is the nectar of devotion. When our hearts are overwhelmed, overflowing with joy, what thought can exist in our head? None. And in the maximum joy, what even subtle sense of individuality is present? What can we say? We say, wow, my mind is blown. It is blown. And what about my mind is blown? Its boundaries. The boundaries of my mind are blown away, dissolved. And I see in the dissolution of the boundaries of this mind the interconnectedness of all things and their ultimate oneness. And then the things we do, our attention to our diet, our attention to our exercise, our meditation, whatever practice we have, our puja or not puja, whatever we do, all of these things are done as, an expression of our devotion and an effort that we make that facilitates our contact with that nectar. And we're not wandering too far into the world and all of its vicissitudes, its ever-changing strain patterns and disappointments. We're not wandering too far into that rabbit hole, because that divine nectar is our treasure. And in possession of that divine nectar, we don't need to know what's down any rabbit hole. Who cares? Who cares what's going on behind the eyes of anybody else? We have our contact, alignment, and flow. We have the unfoldment, the unwinding of our own ancestral traumas. We experience day by day the easing of our burden and the maturing of this whole life circumstance that we are present for, and we're happy. Oh, I wanted to go back a minute and talk about however painful a sensation and the one taste. Through focus, through our attention and our breath, every sensation can be transformed into nectar. Pain and pleasure are of one source, and at that source have one taste. Focus your attention and transform whatever discomfort you are feeling into joy. And practicing that transformation of whatever discomfort you are feeling into joy is the access point to a deeper understanding of the nature of your personal circumstance, number one. And going further into it, it is an understanding of the nature of experience itself, which through devotion and with the experience of the joy that is that devotion, the tensions, the trauma, all of the physiological, biochemical complexity expands from its contact with the energy of your attention and ultimately releases into a circumstance in which we are free. Not even free, I think we are gone beyond. Living in whatever state, the devotees enjoy both within and without the supreme bliss of the touch of your being. What is the supreme bliss of the touch of your being? Contact. 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 And that simply means you quieting your mind and tuning into yourself. Contact. Feeling your body, feeling your breath, then feeling your feeling. And feeling your feeling, you will note that every feeling that you have transforms itself into bliss. And there is nothing other to be done than simply to feel your body and feel your breath and feel your feeling, and bliss is present. The sublime bliss of the touch of your being. And then, of course, in this context, the question arises, who's touching who? Since, where's the touch of, is Shiva touching us? And is that Shaktipat? Is that the descent of grace? Are we touching Shiva? Who's touching what? Who is the doer here? The doer is the divine. A chosen few, O Lord, surpass plaintiveness when worshiping you. They enjoy your spotless, immortal form. Plaintiveness. Pleading. Oh, God, help me. God, help me. God, help me. God, help me. I join you in that prayer. God, help us. But when we quiet our minds and let go of all of the sense of inadequacy that we might have, we might still hold or cling to, ego clinging. When we let go of ego clinging, all our prayers dissolve and we are engaged in the spotless, immortal form of the ultimate reality. Now, I use the term ego clinging in this context to suggest to you, those of you especially who've been with me for a while and have experienced our chud practice, which I brought the femur bone trumpet up here with me to also refer to, kind of suggest. What I'm doing is I'm giving you a mental process I'm giving you a mental context and a mental process by which you can access this spotless, immortal state by simply in 30 seconds doing the chud visualization that you have been taught. Gathering up, collecting your body and your mind, and just playing it and distributing it in front of all of the tensions that you might be stressed by, and letting go. One of the things that some of the challenges that I have faced in the last couple of months have brought up to me again and again, and it happens again and again and again for all of us. What this brought up to me was some attachment that I might have to my material life and to my reputation, but it brings it up to me, and it forces me again to look at what I am attached to. I think, oh shit, I don't want to have to go through any of this bullshit again. But, over and over and over again, as long as we have this body, which is a shit magnet, we will have to face it. And in a sense, this experience that I have been passing through has been wonderful for me. I can't say I love it, or I want to do it every day, but it has evoked for me, all of the attachments and the fears that I have that are my own, which are not many, and all the attachments and the fears that are present in the environment in which I exist on an immediately and intermediately and cosmically, and forced me to gather up all of that entanglement and all of that resistance and all of that fear, and let go of it and sacrifice myself into it and let it be. And so, and that's a good thing. Again and again and again, using one of the mental constructs that is useful to us is simply to envision our chud practice. And in 30 seconds, you can run through the visualization. And in that 30-second visualization, you can come to a complete confrontation with any fear and attachment and release it. The knowers of the Shastras become deluded and thus become estranged. Indeed, delusion produces estrangement. Now, what he's trying to say here is that knowledge, a head full of information, and in his time, the highest knowledge was based in Shastra. Whether it was the Upanishads or the Agamas, whether it was, the Vedic Shastra, it could have been the Jyotish Shastra, the astrological Shastra, or astronomical Shastra. It could have been Ayurveda, medical Shastra. Knowers of the Shastra become deluded with their own sense of accomplishment. And in that sense of accomplishment, they become estranged because, having accumulated some power, we've already talked about siddhi, but but mastering of Shastra is a siddhi, in a sense. That sense of separation, or even the subtlest sense of superiority, produces, is diluted and produces estrangement. In other words, a disconnectedness, an absence of contact, alignment, and flow. But you appear for devotees as the one unrivaled truth. And how can he be like other people, the devotee with mind made pure? By exhausting fame and infamy, attachment and aversion. I guess having a reputation like a doormat in a pig farm, according to this phrase, is not such a bad thing. So I guess exhausting fame and infamy is also the exhaustion of attachment and aversion, and that is the process by which the mind is made pure. What position do the followers of the path of knowledge hold over these great souls who have vanquished the gloom of attachment and aversion with the bright light of your devotion? He's thumbing his nose at Brahmins, basically. And he's also thumbing his nose at his own companions who, having become entangled in his extraordinarily great work, the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Karikas, imagine themselves to know something that other people don't. You have to be impressed with, I'm impressed with this author. And while his grand disciple, Abhinavagupta, is the most famous of all of the non-dual Shaiva scholar writers, Abhinavagupta's Tantra Loka is the most famous work. My own opinion is that Utpaladeva is intellectually superior to them all. He's not only intellectually superior, but spiritually superior, in that, he has taken a mass of information, the information that is both the tattvas and the upayas, and he has distilled this massive information, which is the tattvas and the upayas, down to a single, simple, universally accessible, no matter what station in society, no matter what your caste position is, no matter what your educational level is. He has distilled this to a simple reality which is accessible to the whole of humanity. And engaging in this simple experience, becomes the pathway to, the accumulation of profound insight and knowledge and understanding that is free from the intellectual constipation that accompanies the masters of the Shastra. And bravo to that. And here he's singing the praises of those devotees who have vanquished the gloom of attachment and aversion with the bright light of devotion, whose worship consists of bathing in and the drinking of the nectar of devotion, finding rest in transcendental peace of the first, middle, and final stage. First, peace in our worldly life, peace in our life. The second, peace in our hearts and minds. And the third piece is the cosmic peace that is, the end of this illusion of separateness. You alone are the subject of their songs and speculations. You, the subject of their quest and their worship. Laudable then is the devotee's pilgrimage of life lived in harmony with you, lived in contact, alignment, and flow. Lived in contact, alignment, and flow, this life experience is a pilgrimage, a journey. And we use that language a lot. What is called liberation is the simple ripeness of devotion, O Lord. Having taken the first steps toward that, we are even now almost liberated. With my mind spilling over with your devotion, let any difficulty come my way. But should I feel separate from you, I would not want even an endless chain of happiness. In this context, the devotee, the sadhu, sees every difficulty, every discomfort as an opportunity to engage more deeply in the experience of devotion. And sees, the absence of any kind of stress as slightly a threat to his commitment to that process of immersion. Right? Don't let me feel so good that I forget what the hell I'm doing here. It's okay. You can forget for a while. It's guaranteed you're going to be reminded, no matter what. You are pleased, O Lord, with devotion, and devotion arises at your will. You alone understand how these are connected. Having a form or formless, within or without, in every way, our Lord, you are the embodiment of immortality for those who are drunk with your devotion. And it is that drunkenness with devotion that we aspire to. Oh, that's what we sing about. Whatever the words are, whatever words we sing, whatever notes we sing, whatever music we listen to, what we're going for is that experience of the nectar of devotion. Whatever beauty it is we see with our eyes, whatever deliciousness we taste at lunch with our mouth, whatever aroma or fragrance we experience, all of it arises from and subsides in the beauty that is the focus of our devotion. And the full experience of that beauty is a drunkenness. It is a transcendence of fear and ignoring of, even a dissolution of boundaries. Here in this world, another world exists that bears as fruit joyousness for your devotees. This is a world without fences, a world without strain, a world without tears. That world is present for those who are immersed in devotion. May there be devotion to you as the secret one, as the transcendent one, as the Lord of the universe, as Shambhu, as Shiva, as celestial one. Ah, how indeed could I ever express it? Devotion, devotion, devotion to the transcendent one, ardent devotion. This is why I cry and clamor. Let me have ardent devotion for you and only you. When he's saying only you, this is not a religious exclusivism that you might find like for the followers of Jesus or the followers of Vishnu or the followers of Muhammad or some other followers. The you that he is referring to, is the you that is present in the transcendence of siddhi and mukti, the transcendence of power and liberation, the transcendence of sin and salvation, the transcendence of heaven and hell. The nectar of devotion, is the exit strategy from both heaven and hell. You are the fountainhead, O Lord, of everything beautiful. All things become precious at your touch, whether gem or piece of straw. How true is that? Without the experience of the joy that is inside our contact with beauty, a gem or a piece of straw are exactly the same thing. They have exactly the same meaning. They have exactly the same value. A bathroom in a palace and an outhouse are exactly the same. Without that, the joy inside the experience of beauty, gem or piece of straw is exactly the same thing. They have exactly the same value. We tell ourselves this is wonderful and this is less, and basically we're faking it. We're faking it. Only those people who have the experience of true devotion understand the real value of anything. Not separating themselves from you when experiencing through the senses, the subject and the object, these are your true devotees. What is he saying here? I mean, apart from, he's reiterating the Krama teaching of the process of perceptual respiration, right? The action of the activity of the senses, which is either dualizing or unifying. Here, this is the fundamental Krama teaching. And also, what's he saying? Contact, alignment, and flow. That's what he's saying. Those of us who practice contact with ourself, alignment and flow, contact with each other, alignment and flow, contact, alignment, and flow in the field of our life. We indeed are the true devotees. Living a life in union with the ultimate reality, is a life lived in service to humanity and in contact constantly with our highest self. How beautiful. It is not a life lived in judgment or rejection of anybody or anything. It is a life lived in contact, alignment, and flow. Some, O Lord, embrace you outside of world society. Others forego all the rules, and through the warmth of devotion embrace you in the midst of the world. In the midst of the warmth of devotion, all the rules are bullshit. All the rules we begin to appreciate are man-made. God didn't write the 10 Commandments. I doubt even Moses wrote the 10 Commandments. Somebody wrote the 10 Commandments and blamed it on Moses. And all of those rules were about, they weren't about anything that had anything at all to do with God. Those rules had only to do with two things: personal safety and social stability. And that's it. They were written by political people who did not want their economic advantages to be disrupted. And in fact, they wanted to use these rules not just to stabilize their economic advantages, but to advance their economic advantages at the expense of both their followers and their opposition. But here, with the embrace of devotion, we transcend society, we transcend society's rules, we transcend society's cultures. We become completely and uniquely ourself. And we become at ease in both the experience of and expression of our own unique individual selves, because we're not struggling with anything anymore. There is no longer the, like the relentless self-judgment that's going on. There is just this drunkenness of devotion that is unfolding itself. But that's the thing. We don't have to have a religious entanglement to experience this. It's not about religion. It isn't even about belief. The understanding here is that joy itself is the essence of, the vibrancy of consciousness. A vibrancy of consciousness that is available, that is accessible to every human being, every living being, irrespective of what we believe. To be engaged in joy and to be engaged in the expression of beauty through the practice of contact, alignment, and flow is to facilitate our transcendence of power and liberation, of rules and no rules, of so-called good and evil. Living in the place where we are drunk with the devotion to the ultimate reality, living in that joy, we don't do anything anymore that causes anybody any real problem. it is not possible for us in that state of joy to do things that harm others, because that state emerges in people who are, cognizant of the experience of contact, alignment, and flow. And while what happens can sometimes be crazy things, I remember the story of the experience of Lama Wangdu, my Chud teacher. Lama Wangdu, one time, he got drunk. He was a very happy guy. He got drunk. And in his drunkenness, he put on his little pouch. What do you call those things? Belt pouches? The modern fanny pack. Yeah, he put on his fanny pack. Damn it if he forgot to put on anything else. But he had a fanny pack on. And he wandered with his fanny pack up the road from the refugee camp where he lived into that square in Jabalakil out in front of a Golugpa temple. And he wanders up there, he's wearing his fanny pack. And in this square, in this area, there was a bull, a real bull, a Brahma bull that was quite notorious. And sometimes it was very aggressive and dangerous and it would hurt people. And it was a crowded time in the evening, and Lama Wangdu staggering around there in his fanny pack. And this bull shows up and is threatening, and Lama Wangdu walks right up to it. And he's embracing it. He's petting it. The bull's getting pissed off and doing his thing, and being threatening, and Lama Wangdu completely pacifies the bull. And not only that, gets on its back and takes and opens his fanny pack, and he's riding on this bull. He's sitting on this bull, which is walking. Lama Wangdu is not in charge of it. He's just on it. And he reaches into his fanny pack and he starts taking all of his money and throwing it to the crowd. He did. And this is something that he's famous for in the story that we heard completely independent of anybody who knew him. This crazy Lama who would do shit like that. Lama Wangdu had, in his own way, had no hesitancy about, personal safety or anything. He simply lived at the time in bliss. I think his granddaughters have since, caused him to live a little bit more with a little bit more awareness of physical danger. But Lama Wangdu is saturated with the warmth of devotion, and that's for sure. I honor Shiva, who during the festival of the world's dissolution is passionately and intensely held by Shiva. Shiva. It's Shiva and Shiva. And Shiva is also Parvati, is passionately and intensely held by Shiva, through whom the whole universe is enjoyed by means of drinking, eating, and embellishments. Here again, we have come to a reference to the Kula Yaga, which is the great festival for Utpaladeva. It's a festival which is at the center of Krama ritual practice. The Kula Yaga is where the devotees of Shiva, full of devotion, gather together and they drink and they eat and they dance and they sing. There is music and there is beauty, and sometimes they have intimate contact in this ritual context. They make love. All of which is free from the taint of any expectation at all. There is no expectation. There is only contact, alignment, and flow as an activity which facilitates the overflowing of the warmth of devotion. Shiva and Shiva passionately, intensely embrace, enjoy the whole universe by means of drinking, eating, and embellishments. O Lord of the universe, glorious is your sovereignty, similarly glorious is your other state, where the world appears not as it appears here and now. Whether the world is appearing or not appearing, whether there is perception or the perceptual experience of the drunkenness of the nectar of devotion, that Lord of the universe, which is consciousness itself, is supreme. Ta-da! I hope it's time. How great. 11:33. I almost nailed the timing today. That is a 10 dismount. Ta-da! Okay. All of the practices, dietary practice, movement practice through asana or qigong or whatever else, and lifting weights, or whatever it is we do, all the movement practices, all the meditation practices, whether it is chanting or jap or anything, all the practices which are the ritual practices of Anavapaya, are the mental practices, the chanting of our jap of Shaktopaya, or the meditative experience of Shambhavupaya, all is dissolved in the sole, highest, singular, important practice of Anupaya, which is the nectar of devotion. And it is that nectar of devotion which is the destruction of all the tattvas. The destruction of all the tattvas, which was attended to in the ritual practice of both the krama or the Srividya, or the destruction that is is the ritual practice of chud. Got it? Okay. Namaste, everybody.